Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I stand in this House to speak to every woman, every child, every victim and survivor of gender-based violence. I'm sure the whole House will join me in condemning the spate of violent attacks against our women and our children. Mr. Speaker, while we acknowledge the decline in the number of children and women killed this year over last year, we remain concerned about the acts of violence being committed in our country. Mr. Speaker, let's look at some cases of violence against women and children. 1. The burnt body of 14-year-old Yatana Francis was found by residents in an open lot in her South St. Andrew community by residents. Residents reported hearing shouts of rape and cries for help coming from the open lot, but said that the shouts quickly ended. 2. The skeletal remains of 13-year-old Shanor Ray was found in a bathtub in Mona after she went missing on July 16. 3. Alicia Francis and her 2 sons, aged 6 and 12, were chopped several times by her ex-boyfriend in St. Anne in August of this year. Francis and her younger son were pronounced dead at hospital. 4. 45-year-old Dion Smith was stabbed multiple times in a jealous rage, while her 16-year-old J. Chanel Gordon's throat was slashed as she slept. Her common-law husband killed himself by driving into the rear cover. 5. 43-year-old Marley Russell Knight was beaten to death with a pickaxe. The accused, her husband, allegedly tried to take his own life by drinking a poisonous substance. 6. In January, Simone Collymore and a taxi driver were shot to death in Kingston. The accused, Simone Collymore's husband, and he was charged with murder and conspiracy for killing of his wife and her cab driver. The 7th incident succumbed to injuries received when her ex-lover torched her home in Mocha. In this incident, her 16-year-old brother died and her 53-year-old mother remains seriously injured. Mr. Speaker, these attacks have been heartless, callous, horrific, and brutal, and are causing many of our women and children to worry. This is understandable, but we must not cower in fear, Mr. Speaker. We must expose the brutes, help the security forces to find them, and provide evidence for the courts to put them away. I share the grief of the families as we all wish for speedy investigations and successful prosecutions. Mr. Speaker, I'm also leading my team in the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport to find solutions and to end the violence. I will not be silent. I will raise my voice in this House and elsewhere. I will denounce every act of violence. I will do all that is in my power to help prevent the violence. In this House, we all must do what we can to protect victims of violence and ensure that the perpetrators are punished and that the victims get redress. Tackling violence in our country, particularly against our women and our children, those who are the most vulnerable among us, requires the participation of everyone. I keep saying that we can end the violence, but it requires all of us to end the violence. This is a message that requires constant repetition. As the writer Zadie Smith said, and I quote, "Progress is never permanent. It must be redoubled, restated, and reimagined if it is to survive." And so the violent attacks over the last few weeks, Mr. Speaker, must serve to remind us all that we simply cannot be complacent. We all must restate our commitment to eliminating violence against women and children, and redouble our efforts to making this a safer world for all of us. Mr. Speaker, government has a critical role to play to prevent and to end violence against women and children. In my ministry, we have been doing what we can to tackle this issue as part of the whole of government approach to these horrendous crimes. Through the Bureau of Gender Affairs, we have developed and championed the National Strategic Action Plan for the elimination of gender-based violence. We have begun to implement this 10-year plan that presents an action-focused approach across all of government to eliminate all gender-based violence. This year, Mr. Speaker, the national activities to mark the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women on November 25 will target key stakeholders towards the implementation of the National Strategic Action Plan for the elimination of gender-based violence. We will use this observance to undertake significant outreach activities in communities that are associated with high levels of violence. Mr. Speaker, we have been clear that we need stronger laws to deal with gender-based violence, particularly sexual offenses. For this reason, we reconvened the Joint Select Committee under the chairmanship of Minister Chuck to review laws relating to violence against women, violence against children, the elderly, and persons living with disabilities. We heard submissions from various quarters, and we have given earnest consideration to all the arguments. Our report and recommendations will be laid before this House in short order. It, in fact, will be laid in this House before the end of the month.
Very good.
Mr. Speaker, we are also finalizing proposals for the Prevention of Sexual Harassment Bill, which will be brought to the House very soon. Sexual harassment is not a simple matter. It is a very serious crime that militates against a desired level of peace, harmony, and happiness in our country. And I look forward to our debate in this House and to us providing protection to all women and men as well for unwanted sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and crude sexual behaviors that affect the quality of life by creating an intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment. But, Mr. Speaker, the laws will only be deterrents if people believe that they will be enforced. People who like to abuse women and children will think again if they know that they will be caught and punished. In my view, Mr. Speaker, successful prosecutions will not only depend on investigators and the justice system. Success is also dependent on our people taking a stand and using the mechanisms we put in to deal with the problem. It is one thing for us to have harsh penalties for gender violence, but to punish the perpetrators, we need convictions, and that requires people speaking up. The JCF statistics up to late October show that 38 children were the victim of violent deaths, 10 fewer than the corresponding time last year, or a 21% decline. The police report that 20 of the 38 cases have been cleared up, a clear rate of 53%. But we must continue on this path. And the only way we can continue on this path is to ensure that we work together to eliminate acts of violence and abuse. In remaining true to our commitment to the care and protection of our children, Mr. Speaker, the number of child abuse cases that have not been investigated have moved from 5,000 to only 400.
Excellent.
Critical to this is how we have removed the bureaucracy by the merger of the Child Development Agency and the Office of the Children's Registry to create the Child Protection and Family Services Agency. Joined up government. Mr. Speaker, I believe the message that should be sent from this honorable House today is that each of us has a part to play in ending gender-based violence. Each of us in this House and every single Jamaican. We cannot remain silent. We cannot afford to look the other way. We have a duty as family, neighbor, friend, and co-worker to intervene, to call in the authorities, to give evidence in the court, and to help make Jamaica a land of peace, love, and harmony. Earlier this year, Mr. Speaker, the Most Honorable Prime Minister asked the country on International Women's Day to be unyielding in how we deal with violence against our women and our children. Mr. Speaker, we have been doing the work. We are committed to ensuring that all Jamaicans equally enjoying socially valued goods. We are the administration that continues to seek institutional responses for gender-based violence because we understand that until we really unravel this problem of violence against our women, children, and vulnerable groups, the shared prosperity that we are building for all Jamaicans is at risk. Mr. Speaker, we are advancing the establishment of the first state-run national shelter to assist women who need to leave abusive environments. In the last few months, we completed acquisition of the property, and we are transforming it into a center to accommodate survivors of gender-based violence and their children. It will also offer basic necessities, counseling, and other forms of support. Mr. Speaker, please allow me to acknowledge all those who have graciously donated furniture and other items towards the establishment of the national shelter. We continue to raise awareness of violence against women and children and its impact in various ways, including the use of the media. The media has an important role to play. We are currently developing the No Excuse for Abuse public education campaign with the support of UN Women. In September this year, we entered a 3-year memorandum of understanding with the UN Women Multi-Country Office of the Caribbean for the implementation of the National Strategic Plan to eliminate gender-based violence. Mr. Speaker, included in this MOU is the funding of the No Excuse for Abuse campaign. The No Excuse for Abuse campaign will take the anti-violence message to communities across the country. We will empower women and men, confront all notions about a woman's place, and encourage behavior change among women and men. We are grateful to the many partners, local and international, who continue to give support to our various initiatives to end gender-based violence. We are indeed proud of the achievement of 2 women human rights advocates, Oberlin Smith-White and Novelet Grant, who were recognized on Heroes Day for their unparalleled service to the country. Ms. Grant still continues to help in the reduction of violence against women, though on retirement, as she recently started an advocacy group titled Enough is Enough to address community-based violence on the ground. Groups such as Enough is Enough will be important in the implementation of the National Strategic Action Plan to eliminate gender-based violence. I'm hereby asking more men and more women to join us, because the impact of domestic violence is even felt by those who are not immediately in contact with it. Domestic violence is not a private matter, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, domestic violence is not a private matter. It involves all of us, and no one is immune to this scourge. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm compelled to call for a greater partnership with our men. Those in this chamber who are speaking, and those in this chamber who are listening, and to the wider society. Men are the main perpetrators of the violence, and men have to acknowledge their responsibility for the violence. Men have an important and unique role to play in fixing things. The conduct, behavior, and attitudes of men must change if we are to end sexual harassment and abuse of women and children everywhere. Men need to stand up to end violence against women. Inevitable. We can end the violence. We must end the violence, Mr. Speaker. Let us stand up against violence. Let us stand up for justice, brotherhood, sisterhood, peace, and prosperity. In closing, I extend condolences to the friends, families, communities, and networks of all those who have been affected by the brutal and senseless acts of these callous and weak individuals. I endorse the statement by the Most Honorable Prime Minister that these individuals have no place in Jamaica, the Jamaica that we are trying to create. I now turn my attention to my brothers and sisters in communities across Jamaica. I wish to challenge you to speak up and speak out. I want to say to the men in the communities across Jamaica, particularly in the inner city, don't think that you must beat your woman or your child. You must stop it. And I want to say to the women too, don't go scratch up your man and try to beat him up because you see him with a woman. You must stop it too. I implore you to make use of the various associations as a means of working collectively to tackle family violence and other issues relating to gender-based violence. This is critical to restoring social order and engendering respect for life. This is all about mutual respect. This is all about caring for each other. And this is all about trying to work it out together without becoming violent. You have my commitment, Mr. Speaker. Jamaica has my commitment as your Minister of Gender Affairs to continue working at the interministerial level to do my part in my personal space, as well as with the strength of my team to tackle head-on the monster of gender-based violence. To the women who are still in these toxic relationships, I understand that it is complex, but for your safety, you must walk away. And to her neighbors, you must not turn and look the other way. You too have a responsibility. Enough is enough. There is no excuse, Mr. Speaker, for abuse. And at this time, I commend this statement to the House, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Mr. Good. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we on this side, and of course, all well-thinking Jamaicans share in the expressions of concern, deep concern, that have been expressed by the Minister in her statement. I wish to remind the House that in our last administration, when faced with similar tragedies involving women and children being brutally murdered, we acted swiftly. We prepared two bills, an amendment to the Criminal Justice Administration Act and an amendment to the Child Care and Protection Act, which would have introduced aggravated penalties for any act of violence against a woman or a child. Those bills were tabled around Christmas of 2015-16. However, when Parliament was dissolved in February 2016, they were not passed because that Parliament came to an end. We are now in the third year of the life of this administration. Those bills have not been revived. They have not been brought here to be passed. They haven't been reformulated or tweaked if they were considered to be inadequate. And we have had no legislative change whatsoever for the protection of women or children since this government came into office. And for my part, I think that's a crying shame. I'd also mention the sexual harassment bill. That bill was developed under the previous administration and was brought here and tabled in the name of the then Prime Minister, the Most Honourable Portia Simpson Miller. As were the two bills I mentioned before dealing with violence against women and children. The same fate has befallen that bill. The sexual harassment bill, we're in the third year of this administration and we're still hearing that it's going to come. Now, I don't know what bill they're bringing, but a lot of work went into that bill when we were in office. It's a difficult subject, and I'm sure that it could be improved. But why almost 3 years and we still haven't seen the bill tabled in Parliament? This is not good enough, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I note that Minister Grange mentioned the Joint Select Committee looking at sexual offences, which has been going on for quite some time and which I am a member of. We are near to the close of the life of that Joint Select Committee. We're trying to refine an agreed position on all of the very many issues that have been considered by that committee. But you know, Mr. Speaker, I really hope that when that report is finalized and tabled in this House, it doesn't suffer the same fate as the Joint Select Committee report on the Indicom legislation. Many sittings of this House involving presentations from a full range of stakeholders and detailed scrutiny by the then members of that committee led to the development of that report. It was another statutory review required by the Indicom Act itself, and that was completed in 2015. Nothing has been done in relation to taking those recommendations and moving forward with them. Again, Mr. Speaker, this is not good enough. So I just rose, Mr. Speaker, because when you see the horrible acts of violence against women and children continuing year in, year out, it is our obligation as parliamentarians to respond in a timely manner. And the power that we have is a legislative power. And it's a power that we have been, in the last 2.5 years, derelict by not exercising that power, by not having those bills which were developed by the technocrats under the guidance of the policymakers and brought here. We have not revived them and we have not passed them, and the law remains unchanged. And I think this is a very sad thing. Mr. Speaker, I would just close by mentioning that I salute the Minister for the National Centre which she mentioned. I think this is a very necessary institution. And I would just mention, for example, that Women's Resource Outreach Center, ROC, which is long-standing. They need additional resources and support. I have interact with them fairly frequently, and they do very good work. But you know, like all of these NGOs, they really live hand to mouth. And to the extent that we can find anything more to build them up, they do such good work. I know you'll get a very good bang for the buck. So, Mr. Speaker, that is my contribution this afternoon. We would like to see some further legislative action in this area, and soon. Thank you.
Mr. Chubb.
Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to respond to my friend from South St. Andrew, and also to comment on the statement. First, Mr. Speaker, the Joint Select Committee is meeting and looking at domestic violence and the child care, and that report, we have our final meeting on Thursday. The truth of the matter, Mr. Speaker, is that that committee started under the member from South St. Andrew, and hopefully it will be completed shortly. In relation to the sexual harassment bill, Mr. Speaker, the truth of the matter is that this administration has had the opportunity to look at it and to make some important revision. So the policy had to be looked at again, and the member from Central St. Catherine will comment on it. But in relation to the Indicom bill, Mr. Speaker, you can't ignore the fact, member, that indeed the court ruled on the ability of the Indicom to prosecute, and yes, so we awaited the decision of the court as to how they determine the jurisdiction and powers of the Indicom Act. Since then, Mr. Speaker, we have tried, and we would like a meeting with the opposition as to how we move forward on the Indicom report. I will tell you, member, that our hope would have been that it would be dealt with at the Vale Royal talks, but that has been in abeyance because the Indicom report, which is before us, need to be assessed in light of the court ruling. And our hope is that both opposition and the government can come to some agreement as to the jurisdiction and the powers that we will provide to Indicom in terms of arrest, prosecution, as the case may be. And that is something we're hoping that both sides can agree on. Now, the truth of the matter is that Indicom has taken the case to the Privy Council.
I just want to respond to the member from South St. Andrew who made reference to the sexual harassment bill. Under our administration, we had prepared a policy, and we left the policy there. However, when the other administration, that side, came into government, they chose to abandon the policy and took a draft legislation. No, I'm speaking facts now. It's not politics now. I want you to listen because I know you're a balanced person. I know the member from South St. Andrew is balanced. Now, what happened, the policy was put aside, legislation was drafted and taken to cabinet for approval, which included in that legislation that cases would be referred to the Ministry of Labor, and the IDT would address those cases. They lost government, we came in. It turned out that because our administration wants to ensure that whatever we do is properly done, when I took it to cabinet, I was advised that I should take the policy to cabinet. And so we had to dust off the policy we had left there that was abandoned, because legislation must be supported by a policy. And so it got delayed because we had to now go and revisit the policy we had left there and draft the legislation accordingly, because the Ministry of Labor had written to say that the IDT would not be able to hear those cases. And so we now had to put a tribunal, make the recommendation of a tribunal being put in place, which was in the original policy that we left there. So all of that created a delay, right? And therefore, I don't think it's a contentious matter. I'm just explaining the facts, and that is what has caused the delay. We are now ready. Everything is signed off on. It will be going to LegCom, and we will be taking the legislation here, right, for it to be passed. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not aware, Minister, of any abandonment of the policy. To the contrary, the legislation was developed in furtherance of the policy and was a tangible step to make the policy subjected to sexual harassment. Now, the truth is that in our extrapolation of the policy, we thought that the IDT should be expanded to establish an additional division dealing with sexual harassment matters in the workplace. Because of their expertise in dealing with industrial relation matters, that we felt that that would be an appropriate institutional setting to have it, because it would, rather than create a whole new body, given we're in an era when your Minister of Finance will tell you that we're trying to reduce, not increase the number of new public bodies. So I'm responding with the facts, because you gave us some facts, and I'm responding with some facts. No, these are the facts.
Mr. Speaker.
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I must remind you and my colleague opposite that this is not a debate. This is a statement by Minister. And she has responded, and at the end of the matter, you're not allowed to respond. It's not a debate. You can ask questions. You can ask questions for clarification, but you can't debate.
Thank you for that reminder.
Mr. Golden, 1 minute. Mr. Golden. Minister Grange, you had a statement, and you have diverted from your statement, which is encouraging others to proceed on that matter, and I'm not going to allow it. Statement by Minister was done. Questions are to be asked. Nothing that leads to a debate will be entertained. And so I'm going to ask you, Minister, do not proceed on that. A statement was made. If Mr. Golden has a question on it, make a question.
Mr. Speaker, I think we can leave it at that, because the bill is coming, we're told, and there'll be another opportunity to discuss it then.
Thank you, Mr. Golden. Mr. Samuel.
Mr. Speaker. Yes, again. Permission to speak from a seat other than my own. Mr. Speaker, when we get up...
Yeah, you may proceed on this.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Minister for the statement that I think, again, is a timely one based on all that is happening. She outlined a number of the cases. I sat there listening, and I didn't want individuals who are listening to us to believe that we were not all seized of the urgency and importance of dealing with the manifestations of gender-based violence that we have been seeing. And I wanted to make sure that we were all clear that we can send from the House of Parliament a unified message about breaking the silence around the kind of gender-based violence that we have been seeing. I wanted to just say in particular, we're dealing with the legislative framework, and that is fine. I'm just wondering where, because I didn't hear it, where are we dealing with some of the root causes of gender-based violence? I heard about going into communities. I wasn't sure if we were looking at actually making sure that our children, for example, could become part of the individuals, the stakeholders, that we empower and embolden to be part of the solution. So I wanted to ask about that. I wanted to ask about how we were dealing with the normalization of discrimination, which we are attributing as part of the root causes. And I say that because sometimes we don't understand how our actions in other areas help to normalize gender-based violence. So we might have a problem with gender-based violence, but in government we might not have a problem with some of the discrimination we see. When persons go to the health clinic, we might not have a problem with the kind of discrimination that they face when they go there, without understanding that all of these dots are in fact connected. And as long as people see violence and discrimination and victimization as a normal part of everyday life in Jamaica, it is going to be difficult to get rid of gender-based violence. And then finally, I'm not sure if we have done a kind of sensitization for the members of the Houses of Parliament, for example, so that we could go a little bit more deeply into how it works and what takes place, so we have a better understanding, all of us who interface from day to day with members in our community who are themselves victims of gender-based violence. And then there are some other issues that we're going to have to deal with. Is there a special program for the police, for the church? Because there are some groups where we know that they interface with victims, and based on our tradition and the kind of insensitivity that the culture has developed, that it makes it more difficult for victims to report, to be taken seriously, and to have the confidence that the system is really supporting them.
Thank you for your comments. Excellent. Excellent. There is now a Gender Advisory Council on which the People's National Party is represented. And that council is looking at strategic priority areas such as prevention, protection, investigation, prosecution, enforcement of court orders, enforcement of victims' rights to compensation, reparation and redress, and the protocols for the coordination of the National Strategic Action Plan and also data management. So the areas that you have indicated, they are covered under these. And I would certainly invite you, if you wish, to sit also on the council, although the People's National Party is already represented there. I also want to commend you on your recommendation for sensitization of this House, because I think it is truly needed. And I just want to say to my colleagues that we will set up the sensitization session, and I'm really hoping that the response will be very favorable and we will have good attendance. Thank you.